he worked with. The press connection was hanging by a thread at the end of 1979, and there was a community meeting to decide on its future. Ron was one of 7 votes to shut it down against significant community pressure. He wrote a column for the paper explaining why, and then in the final issue, he wrote a heartfelt tribute to all those who had devoted so much to the paper. He put it this way: it was a paper built on sacrifice, respect for labor, anger at injustice, and faith in the democratic process. But once again, Ron had paid a high personal price. When he picked up his life after the press connection, there are 2 other stories that he put under the heading of courage. One came in 1982 when the newly elected governor, Tony Earl, named Ron as his communications director. That was quickly followed by an infamous front page headline in the Milwaukee Sentinel: "Avowed homosexual named Earl press chief." Ron immediately called Tony and offered to resign. There was that mix of courage and sensitivity again. But the courage went both ways. Tony's response was a classic: "Bullshit, you will! If I can't deal with a few small-minded people on this, what am I going to do when I have a real problem?" Ron stayed on the job for the entire Earl administration. Later, post-Tony, after working on Joe Sensenbrenner's re-election campaign, Ron wound up on the desk at New York Newsday, running their copy editing operation, and one night, in late July of 1996, a story came over the wires about Richard Jewell, originally thought to be a hero for discovering a backpack with a pipe bomb in it and trying to clear the area during the Olympics in Atlanta. Now, the story said that the FBI was treating Jewell as a suspect. Lots of news outlets ran with the story. Ron blocked it at Newsday, saying wisely that the sources for the story were not solid. Other news outlets would wind up paying large settlements to Jewell. Ron was willing to stand his ground, even when the TVs in the newsroom showed Tom Brokaw reporting the story on NBC. Boldness and courage are great qualities, but one of the things that really set Ron apart was his creativity. Sometimes it could get him into small bits of trouble. Think of Dame County. Or take this example from an early newsroom lunch with Cap Times employees when Ron's nemesis, Bob Balloon, said he had to leave early to go to the dentist. "And how often do you get your teeth sharpened?" Ron asked. It's why when he was coming back to Wisconsin to work as Tony's spokesperson, his boss at the San Jose Mercury News bid him farewell with this bit of advice: "Watch your mouth." One of Ron's longest-term friends in Madison is Ricardo Gonzalez, who owned the Cardinal Bar, a regular hangout for Ron. He recalls one day Ron saying how clean the place was, and Ricardo told Ron he liked to keep it spick and span. And Ron shot back, "You mean speaking Spanish?" Ron was always good with quips and headlines, but he was also an elegant writer. Consider just this one example in a series of stories about the Earl years he wrote for the Cap Times after Tony was defeated for re-election. Listen for the imagery and how he connects that to really trenchant political analysis. Tony Earl was a concert grand on the stage of Wisconsin politics. Offstage, he was a friendly upright with a glass of beer on the lid. He played his themes sincerely and convincingly to those near enough to hear them. But he played without amplification. Many voters could not hear him at all or only heard discordant notes. That's a shame, because what he was playing was a love song written for Wisconsin. What a beautiful paragraph. It's no surprise that those words were filled with musical imagery. Ron's music was so much a part of Ron's life, and that was another place where his creativity shone forth. Sue Clary Koch, who grew up in Saginaw, a few years older than Ron. They both attended Arthur Hill High School, and they both wrote for the school newspaper. Years later, she ran into Ron at a party here in Madison, and Sue remembers how he immediately went to the piano and played the Arthur Hill fight song. If you were ever at a party with Ron, and there was a piano nearby, you knew the magic of his fingers on the keyboard. One of the keyboards he played was at Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin. He had immersed himself in the life and stories of Wright, turning out one book on the building of Taliesin, working on another that told about the stories of the women who helped Wright get his architectural commissions. Those who worked with Ron on the Taliesin book came to admire not only his creativity, but also the care he brought to his work and to them. Kristen Kilpatrick, the Wisconsin Historical Society Press marketing manager, remembers how Ron came to the authors' meetings each year without any pretense. She wrote that he was forever seeking more information about how to be a better writer, a better speaker, a better person. And she also wrote he wanted to see his fellow authors succeed as he had, and it showed. He was an accomplished writer, but he was also an accomplished mentor to so many others. One last story about Ron's creativity. This one involves a doorknob. In 1985, Daniel Breitenstein, a Watertown, Wisconsin native, was going to be a mission leader for the Space Shuttle Discovery. He contacted Governor Earl's office to see if there was a Wisconsin token he could take on the mission. So he sent the request over to Ron and said, do something with this. Ron came up with a brass doorknob from the Capitol. Breitenstein took it into space, and then it was displayed in the governor's reception area for a while. When Ron left the Capitol, after Tony's term ended, he asked if he could take the doorknob with him. It traveled with him for many years in sort of an earthbound orbit. And then he had an idea. When he was working for Diane in 2015, he went with her to the Evjue campus in her district in Verona and presented it to a very surprised Judy Faulkner, mentioning her interest in space and her sense of fun. She loved it, and asked him to make a formal presentation at that year's user group meeting. You know, the one that brings thousands of people to the Evjue campus where they gather in the massive deep space auditorium. Ron told Judy Faulkner, since you have boldly gone where no woman has gone before and opened many doors along the way, I'm happy to pass this on to you as its proper custodian. And then Ron, that quick tongue at work, turned to her and said, you could never have enough brass. The doorknob is now part of a beautiful display in a break room on the Evjue campus. Remember when Ron called Kathy Falk after the Dane County headline? Remember his commitment to his co-workers on the Press Connection and his mentorship to fellow authors? That's all part of the spirit of compassion that defined Ron's life. In his early days in Madison, he was giving 10% of his income to help establish the Gay Center, the predecessor to what we now know as Olbrich. He opened his apartment to people who needed places to stay, opened his wallet to people he encountered facing hard times. Betty Harris Custer brought up her gratitude to Ron for reaching out to her son Jamie as a mentor, something he did over and over for people. Ron was generous with his time, his talent, his money. That was part of what gave him joy. And joy is the final word for this remembrance. He exuded joy in so many situations. Jeff Times colleague Kim Sunderledge remembers all the laughs they shared on the city desk. Former Madison police officer Donna Winter wrote about how Ron could make me laugh and make me smile. He used his music to bring joy to people at parties and residents at nursing homes. He used his wit to bring joy to newspaper readers and to newsroom colleagues. Kathy Borkowski was director of the Wisconsin Historical Society Press when Ron's Taliesin book came out. He wanted to have a book launch party at the Harmony Bar just down the street. And she was worried whether the scholarly title would draw a crowd at the Harmony. In Kathy's words, we needn't have worried. There was a steady flow of book lovers, Wright fans, friends of Ron who streamed into the bar, bought books, chatted with Ron while he signed copies. It was a glorious event, and in the end, we only worried about running out of books. There was another slice of joy in Ron's life, and she was named Elaine. Judy Karofsky wrote, they truly taught the world how to love. Elaine was the scheduler on Joe Sensenbrenner's campaign in 1989 when he hired Ron as his communications person. I'm sure she did a good job of scheduling Joe, but another schedule began to take shape. It became a long-distance romance, and it's worth noting that Ron's sexuality was never a static thing in his life. In Ron's own capsule biography focused on his education, his jobs, his professional accomplishments, it's 14 pages long. This paragraph jumps out. Spoke to Elaine Harris DeSmith of Madison daily by phone for 4 years, spent all vacations together, danced with her at the Rainbow Room, and married her in Madison's Unitarian Meeting House on July 3rd, 1993. When Elaine was asked to run for the Dane County Board in 2004, Ron was immediately all in behind her campaign. When Ron faced a liver transplant in 2007, Elaine was all in behind him. They were an amazing couple. And their love spilled over into joy for all of those who knew them. So those are a few themes of Ron's life: boldness, courage, compassion, creativity, joy. There are more that I'm sure each of you could come up with. But let's end with a few words that were important to Ron and that maybe we can carry forward as his spirit lives on within us. The first comes from a piece he wrote for the Cap Times in 1973 describing a visit to Washington in 1969, just before Richard Nixon was sworn in as president. 4 years ago, I was walking down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington. On impulse, I decided to stop in and see the government. Up the marble steps, into the Greek Revival building, past the guards I tripped, and sure enough, the Constitution was still there. Yellowed and a bit frayed at the edges behind the glass, but still holding up. Next to it was the Bill of Rights, still on open display. I looked at it hard. I looked hard at my rights. Good luck, I said. The second comes from the end of that piece Ron wrote as the Press Connection reached its last issue. It's time to say goodbye and think warmly of our friends who are legion. The benediction is this: don't mourn, organize. And finally, the words Ron chose for his epitaph from Walt Whitman's poem, After the Supper and Talk. Loth, oh so loth to depart, garrulous with the very last. That's Ron. One more hymn that Ron selected. This one with a few comments from him before we close. He loved the closing line from Harry Emerson Fondwick, a great liberal preacher from the middle of the 20th century. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage for the facing of this hour. Ron said, it's actually a Welsh rouser, and Elaine and I have enjoyed singing it in four-part harmony at Welsh hymn sings in small country churches here. And Ron adds, it's important to repeat the last couplet dramatically. Those are your instructions. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.